So picture this. The American Revolution is over. We've won. Now what? The brand new United States has to build a government completely from scratch. Their first attempt was something called the Articles of Confederation, and it was a system so flawed it nearly brought the whole country crashing down before it even got started. So what made America's first government such a spectacular failure? And really, that's the big question behind this whole story. The founders, absolutely terrified of tyranny, were about to learn a very harsh lesson. A government with too little power can be just as dangerous as one with way too much. To get why the Articles were the way they were, you have to understand one single thing: fear. I mean, the American colonists had just fought this long, bloody war to escape a powerful king and a strong central government. So their number one goal? Create a system that could never, ever become that. I mean, you can literally see how the Articles were a direct reaction against everything they hated about British rule. For every feature of the monarchy, they basically did the exact opposite. Hated the powerful king? Okay, no president for us. Hated a strong central government telling everyone what to do? Fine, the states will have all the power. And that power to tax people directly? Absolutely not. Forbidden. And this gets to a really crucial point. Under the Articles, the United States wasn't a single country like we think of it today, not even close. It was a confederation, which is really just a fancy way of saying it was a firm league of friendship between 13 independent, powerful states. The central government was less of a government and more of a committee. So let's dive in and see how this thing actually worked. Or, didn't work. And this is key. The weaknesses we're about to talk about, they weren't mistakes. Nope. They were put there on purpose, all because of that deep-seated fear of a strong government. I mean, just look at this. The contrast is just, wow. The National Congress could declare war, but it couldn't raise a national army to actually fight it. It could sign treaties with other countries, but it had zero power to enforce them. But the biggest one, the absolute killer, is right there. Congress could not tax. And without the power to tax, it has no money. And without money, well, it has no real power at all. And even for the few things Congress could do, getting anything done was practically impossible. To pass any major law, they needed 9 of the 13 states to agree. Think about that. Imagine trying to get 9 different groups to agree on anything important today. It made the government incredibly slow, and most of the time, totally ineffective. But this is the real kicker. What if they wanted to fix the system? What if they realized, hey, maybe we made this a little too weak? To change the Articles, they needed unanimous agreement. All 13 states. A single no from one state could block any attempt at reform, basically trapping the entire country in a system that everyone was starting to realize was completely broken. Okay, so the design was broken, we get that, but what did that actually look like in the real world? Well, this intentional weakness didn't stop tyranny. Instead, it just created a whole new set of nightmares that pushed the young nation right to the edge of collapse. This quote just says it all, doesn't it? The national government was basically a charity. It had to go, hat in hand, to the states and ask for contributions. And just like any donation, the states could, and very often did, just say nope, leaving the government completely broke. And you can guess what happened next, right? A total economic meltdown. The government couldn't pay back its loans from the war. The very soldiers who had fought and bled for independence, they went unpaid. Congress's only move was to print more money, but with nothing to back it up, it was worthless. And to make things even more chaotic, states started printing their own money. It was an absolute mess. Yeah, worthless. That's what the national money became. The situation got so bad, people started using a new phrase, not worth a continental. It was this bitter joke about how useless the government's money was, a symbol of the nation's total economic freefall. And, this weakness wasn't just an internal problem. Oh, no. Other countries were watching, and they saw the U.S. as a total pushover. Great Britain just ignored the peace treaty and refused to remove its troops from American land. Spain blocked American farmers from using the Mississippi River, which was a vital trade route. Why? Because they knew the U.S. government was too weak to do a single thing about it. So let's recap. The country's falling apart, it's broke, nobody respects it, and the economy is in shambles. The whole thing was a powder keg just waiting for a spark, and it was only a matter of time before something lit the fuse. And in 1786, that spark finally came. It was an event called Shays' Rebellion. So here's the rundown. In Massachusetts, you have these farmers. A lot of them were vets from the Revolutionary War, guys who still hadn't been paid, by the way. And they're losing their farms over these crazy state taxes. They protest. Then the uprising gets bigger, and it starts to threaten the whole state government. Massachusetts panicked and asked the national government for help. But remember, the government had no army and no money. It was powerless. And this was the final straw. It proved to everyone that this government couldn't even do its most basic job, keeping the peace at home. You can imagine how this terrified the nation's leaders. People like George Washington were panicked. But that disaster was also a massive wake-up call. The failure of the Articles wasn't the end of the American story. It was actually a really painful but necessary lesson on the road to building something better. You can really see the whole story play out right here. In 1781, they created a government that was intentionally too weak. 5 years later, Shays' Rebellion happens, and that's the breaking point. Everyone realizes this is not working. And that crisis is the very thing that pushes them to meet, to debate, and by 1789 to create something entirely new, the Constitution, a new attempt at finding a better balance. So yeah, the Articles of Confederation were a massive failure. But you know what? That failure taught one of the most important lessons in American history. They were so scared of a government with too much power that they accidentally created one with no power at all. What they learned was that you need balance. You need a government that's strong enough to actually govern, but with enough limits to protect people's freedom. And that really brings us right back to today, doesn't it? Because this debate, it never really ended. That fundamental question of finding the right balance between the power of the government and the liberty of the people, well, that's a conversation we are still having every single day. In many ways, it's still the central question of the American experiment.